Welcome to the Gutsy Fertility Podcast, where health empowerment meets heartfelt conversations. I'm your host, Dr. Mandy Patterson, functional naturopath and fertility expert. Each episode of the Gutsy Fertility Podcast is a journey through the most pressing health topics of our times, viewed through the lens of functional naturopathy and emotional empowerment. So get ready to get gutsy with me as we hop into today's podcast topic. Hey everyone, welcome back to the Gutsy Fertility Podcast. I am so excited about our guest today, Katie Kimball. I have followed her for a really long time. She is an amazing woman. She has been a teacher and she's kind of gotten into the entrepreneurial space. So she's known as the national voice of healthy kids cooking. She's a former teacher, two-time TEDx speaker, writer, and mom of 4 kids. She created the Kids Cook Real Food e-course, which was recommended by the Wall Street Journal as the best online cooking class for kids. Her blog, Kitchen Stewardship, helps families stay healthy without going crazy, and she's on a mission to connect families around the healthy foods, teach every child to cook, and help families instill those all-important life skills. Welcome to the podcast, Katie.
Well, thank you, Mandy. Of course, my whole bio is about teaching kids to cook, but today we get like my side weird geek passion that I have actually been called on the news, the Wikipedia of sunscreens. So I probably should.
I did not know that.
Yes, I probably should put that in my bio for you to read because
Yep.
the Wikipedia of sunscreens, that's why I'm here today, but definitely the mom of 4 thing plays into.
Yeah, this is perfect timing given like we're all going into summer. People get really concerned about skin health and all of us are outside and there's so many myths out there on sunscreens and ingredients. And so you guys, we're going to dive into this today. It's such a huge topic. I'm sure we could actually talk about it for like at least 8 hours, but we're going to condense it down into 1 hour here. So let's talk about natural sunscreen and why people should choose a natural sunscreen over whatever we can find in the store. There's so many options out there. It's just overwhelming.
It's crazy. I always take pictures every season when the massive palette shows up in Costco because I'm like, no.
Yes.
Should we start with our personal health reasons or our Earth's health reasons? Where do you want to begin?
Well, let's kind of start with the personal. I think that's a good starting place.
Yeah. So we need to understand the way conventional petrochemical sunscreen active ingredients work, right? So when you turn around your sunscreen, unlike, like your shampoo is not required to list the ingredients, but because sunscreen has these active ingredients, it's actually, they all have the ingredients on there. So you'll see under the active ingredients section, a bunch of really long words that probably mean nothing to people. There's things like oxybenzone, octinoxate, avobenzone, homosalate, blah, blah, blah. Okay. Yeah. If it's anything other than zinc oxide, which is actually pretty easy to read and say, that means it's a petrochemical sunscreen made from, the petroleum, right? So it's made from plastic. And the way those work is, first of all, they need 15 to 20 minutes to sink down to past the top layer of the skin because they're going to be effective when the sunscreen ingredients have a chemical reaction under your skin with the sun. Doesn't that sound lovely and safe? No.
Right.
And so when you are in the sun with petrochemical sunscreen on your skin, again, first of all, that's why they say put it on 15 to 20 minutes before you go out. It literally doesn't work. It's not at a deep enough layer of the skin until 15 to 20 minutes. So that's risky already. Because how many people are slapping it on when you were already at the beach or the pool? Right?
Yeah.
Zinc oxide sunscreen starts to work immediately because it works completely differently. It's effective more as a blocker or a reflector. It sits on the surface of the skin. It doesn't need to be absorbed down in. Petrochemical sunscreens also lose their effectiveness after 2 hours. They literally have degraded, right? If we remember high school chemistry, you have 2 elements, they have a chemical reaction, and then there's byproducts, right? So the byproducts of the chemical reaction are no longer the same thing as you started with. They're not sunscreen anymore after 2 hours. And again, that's why everyone always says it's in like the culture, right? Reapply after 2 hours, it's on the bottles. It's because it's literally gone. It's not effective anymore. Those are really practical reasons. I think to switch to zinc oxide because, again, it works the moment it touches your skin, it's effective, and it's effective as long as it's on your skin. So if you're not toweling off, if you're not sweating or swimming, it can be effective. We've even literally seen efficacy the next day from zinc oxide
Interesting.
sunscreen, right? Like we washed one of my husband's legs off with soap and water,
Yeah.
didn't wash the other one, did a test of like yesterday's sunscreen versus nothing. And the difference in
Yeah.
the shade, the tone of his skin was clear. It was super clear that it was still working the next day. So should you reapply zinc oxide sunscreen? Sometimes, yes. Again, if you're sweating, if you're swimming, if you're toweling off, but it's so much less like mine's on. Because when you're a mom at the beach with your kids, you've got 6 kids, I've got 4. We all go to the beach. That's like 14 people running around. Are we really checking our watches, friends? Are we really reapplying after
Right.
2 hours? So we're just not. We are not the type of culture and society that reapplies well after 2 hours. So why not use the one that's easier? So that's all practical. Like that's not even health. I kind of said I'd start with health, but I started with
I'm like,
practical.
I so wish I would have known this stuff like so long ago because, like you said, with 6 kids, like I literally would buy the
Mm-hmm.
huge gallon jug of, and you're gonna probably like Blue Lizard because I know that's one on your list that you're like, yeah,
Better than many.
but yeah, I mean, it was like, and honestly, that's kind of how I found out about that. Was we went to the dermatologist, kids were having some skin issues, and we lived abroad in Australia where they literally, like, these kids are doused in sunscreen every day because it's the like cancer capital of the world, skin cancer capital. And
Mm-hmm.
so, like I'm like, wish I knew all this stuff back then, but so
So
fascinating, like your
let's
experiment.
enter in at skin cancer because that is a great next step. So, conventional petrochemical sunscreens, they're under the skin, they're having a chemical reaction. Oh my goodness, what are some of those byproducts? They're oxidizing your skin cells. So, if you think about
Yeah.
what does that word mean, Katie? Oxidizing. We people say eat your blueberries because they contain antioxidants, right? So
Yep.
oxidizing means it's negatively impacting your cells. It definitely any oxidation of any kind, whether you've eaten like some rancid oils internally or you're putting things on your skin that could create oxidation, definitely a cancer risk, massive cancer
Yeah.
risk. So it just slays me that we're slapping stuff on our skin to protect from skin cancer, which also increases our risk of skin
For skin
cancer.
cancer.
Ouch. Like, that's so messed up.
It is so messed up. And as a naturopath, like I'm always when I'm looking at labs on people, vitamin D is one of the big ones like I check because like that's not really screened in conventional medicine. And what we find is with higher levels of vitamin D actually are better for overall health.
Right.
And I cannot tell you in the last week how many labs I've looked at. I mean, so many with people like in the 20 range, and really from like a functional perspective, we like to see that 60 to 80, even upwards of 100 and beyond. Like we see people fare better well, health wise. And so, I think another thing here is too, when we're telling people, you need to get direct sun on your skin for say 20 or 30 minutes. So maybe we should like hold off before we slap that sunscreen on to give our bodies some time to, absorb that sunshine vitamin, right?
It's true. And I mean, I don't have any letters after my name. I'm just a crazy sunscreen researcher, but that is what I would recommend if I was recommending would be, yeah, to try to get that 15. It depends on your skin tone, right? So
It
my
does.
husband has like some Irish, some Canadian. He's very pale. So probably 10 minutes for him
Yeah,
midday is enough. The darker your skin, the more time you need. And test, don't guess. Test your vitamin D levels. Know what you
exactly.
need.
100%. Yeah, you're so right. So let's kind of talk about the other side of this because we kind of have talked about the personal side, but let's talk about the other flip of the coin that we were kind of discussing.
Right. Yeah. The environmental side. Although, is it okay?
Yeah.
I don't want to leave the personal side yet because we didn't talk hormones.
Oh yeah, let's talk
That's
about
a
it.
massive deal. So most of the, words on the back of the sunscreen tubes that are conventional petrochemical active ingredients are hormone disruptors. I had a
Yes.
chemist who's a sunscreen formulator tell me once that a full body application on like a bikini clad woman, so like all your skin, is equivalent to
Uh-huh.
taking a daily estrogen pill.
Oh
What?
my
Like
word.
that's and to
Crazy.
make it worse, everyone else their behavior is affecting us. Because where does that
Yeah.
sunscreen go? It's going into the lakes and rivers, the oceans, it's going down the drain when we shower.
Yep.
It's in our water that we're drinking, and it makes me so frustrated. That's why I'm like, it's not just about my choices and the choices I'm making for my children. This is why I like stand on this soapbox and yell a lot to say everyone has to switch away from these petrochemical sunscreen ingredients because they're massive hormone disruptors. And it's impossible to say, what percent of the infertility struggles are because of these ingredients, but we do know that 97% of infant cord blood has oxybenzone in it.
Right,
It's
right.
definitely there. It's definitely a hormone disruptor. You can take that information and do whatever you want with it. I choose zinc oxide sunscreen.
Right. Well, and we were just my partner and I, Dr. Jeannie Shuffley, we were just speaking with our group of couples yesterday about this, the importance of water and water filtration, and why it's really not great just to drink out of the tap
Mm-hmm.
water, right? Like, we think because we live in the United States that our water is just clean, but it's like we find antibiotics in there, endocrine disruptors,
Mm-hmm.
like all kinds of things. And so I tell people, when you talk about testing and not guessing, you can actually test your water and see what's in there to find out. And we find that it's you almost have to have some sort of filter for your water system to make sure you're getting clean water.
Yep. It don't even get me started on the microplastics that are now being found in all city water and
Yeah,
bottled water. Like, those are also endocrine
right.
disruptors, not sunscreen related, but yeah, filter your water.
And don't drink out of plastic water bottles.
Right.
That's like one of my first things that I'm like, get yourself a really good, like, I've got my Yeti right here. It's stainless steel. Like, you don't have to worry so much about those endocrine disruptors. And yeah, save the planet by not buying water bottles, which I know we're all guilty because we're out busy. We're going to all these kid things, and events, and just being and living out in the real world. Sometimes we do have to buy a water bottle, but when you can, have your own.
Mm-hmm. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. So we want to
Mhm.
switch to environment now, which
Yeah, let's talk about
it's
environment.
a perfect segue, because I just said, like, everyone's actions are affecting my family and your family, which super stinks, but everyone's actions are also affecting the health of our oceans. And I don't care if
Yeah,
you live in the middle of the US in Iowa, the sunscreen you're using can actually affect the oceans because there's still that runoff, right? And there's farm runoff, and everything ultimately flows to the ocean. And so what we're seeing is, we hear a lot of climate change stuff, and the temperature of the ocean is rising, and it's killing off certain, species and areas and stuff. Um, it's quite possible that sunscreen is one of, or the major cause of
yeah,
that, because
yeah,
some of the sunscreens have such an impact on the ocean. And it's the sunscreen tested in the ocean water is, I don't have the numbers in front of me, sadly, but it's insanely high. It's not safe. And also, the oxybenzone in particular, that's one that, and good news about oxybenzone coming up, but oxybenzone has really been found to affect coral bleaching. So
ah,
it's literally like one-to-one correspondence. It's killing off our coral reefs. And oxybenzone was the most prominent sunscreen ingredient 5 and 10 years ago. The good news is that places like Hawaii, Key West, Palau, a couple other areas are actually banning
oh yeah,
oxybenzone, and octinoxate, I think, is the other ingredient that they're often saying. So if you fly to Hawaii, you'll be told, like, on the plane, you cannot use, and if you go like on an excursion in Hawaii, the captains of the
yeah.
boats will check your sunscreen and they will not let you use it. It's
Well,
awesome.
we lived in Brisbane, Australia, and came back in 2020, and we went to the Great Barrier Reef and went snorkeling there. And yeah, it's the same thing there as well. Like, Australia is very protective of their land, and like I said, they use a lot of sunscreen, just because of living so close to the equator. Really has an impact. And another piece here that I even find that people don't really understand is, and this kind of ties in what you do with the diet side of things and coaching people around nutrition, families around nutrition, is actually the cleaner and healthier we eat, and eating and taking in abundant vegetables and antioxidants, phytonutrients actually is protective, makes us more resilient as human beings if we go out into the sun. So going back to the blueberries, having a cup of blueberries before, like in the morning before you go out, is actually going to be protective. It's going to make your skin more resilient and less prone to like damage and cancer and like all of those kinds of things.
Yes, and there are so many foods that you can eat that are really sun protective for your skin. I know coconut oil is another big one, and I love how that makes so much sense. Like, where are coconuts grown? They're grown when there is an abundance of sun. And so like, oh my goodness, there's this cycle of people who are in the sun who eat the native coconuts probably have more, natural protection. It's awesome. And I know some people will say, eat your sunscreen. Like, they're like anti-sunscreen advocates completely. I don't think that's safe. Like, yes, eat your sunscreen, do everything you can to eat antioxidants and eat sun protective foods. But if you're burning without the sunscreen, put the darn sunscreen on. Just choose a zinc oxide brand,
Absolutely, like protect your DNA, right? Because we do know that, like, once we have damage done to cells in our body, like sometimes our body can't overcome that and is not able to repair by itself. So it's a really good point. So
so we can protect the coral reefs. We can take care of our hormones. It's honestly so much easier. Like yesterday, my 9-year-old third grader had field day. And so what all the parents are told, put the sunscreen on your kids before they leave home. And I'm just shaking my head thinking, these other kids are coming with likely ineffective sunscreen, particularly because field day was more than 2 hours. And I'm so
somewhat toxic. I mean, the toxic aspects of it, right?
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, it's super toxic. Plus, it's ineffective. Like, it's really a 1-2 punch. It blows my mind that anyone uses anything other than zinc oxide. Here's another fun fact about zinc oxide. It's also naturally really balanced as far as broad spectrum, because there's the UVA, there's the UVB, and there's the UVC rays, and they have different impacts, right? One of them is going to give us the burn, one's going to cause the cancer, one's going to give us the wrinkles. And some of the, so it was not regulated until fairly recently that sunscreens had to be broad spectrum. So we had this real problem where the ingredients in the conventional sunscreens were protecting really well from burns, because that's what people were buying it for. That's what people could see, right? I buy this sunscreen, I don't get sunburned, therefore I feel safe. Unfortunately, the formulators of those sunscreens were not including enough of the ingredient called avobenzone, which protects from the UVA rays that cause cancer. So here we have all these people feeling really safe in the sun. They're putting on stuff that oxidizes, that can increase their risk for skin cancer, and they're getting a ton of UVA rays, increasing the risk for skin cancer, and but they feel safe because they don't see the burn. So that's recently the FDA has, when I say recently, sometime in the last 10 years, the FDA has finally said, hey, we've got to have more broad spectrum balance here, so that if we're protected from some of the rays, we need to be protected from all so that people don't feel that false sense of safety, which caused avobenzone going in every single conventional sunscreen I saw. And guess what? Avobenzone, when it gets on your clothes, you don't see it until it goes through the washer and the dryer, and then there's orange stains all over your clothes. So like, that's small, but I don't like doing laundry. I don't like weird, mysterious magic stains that show up after I've done my laundry. So this is what I'm saying. Like, even if you're like, yeah, Katie, I don't know if you're right about the hormone effects. I don't know if I care about the coral reefs. Like, there are really practical reasons to choose zinc only as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Thanks for like diving into that little, I'm sure, like these rabbit holes that we go down, right? As researchers and advocates for health. So there's so much here. I mean, I just like, my mind's blown like on the research that you've done. It's just fascinating. And I've even just learned so much just hearing this. So as we kind of talk about like endocrine disruption and that affecting fertility and women's hormones, right? Because fertility, women's hormones, it's really kind of all the same. So how does that affect choices over the years and for generations to come, because I speak so much about generational health and wellness, and I know you're really passionate about that too. Having as many kids as we both have, like, we want our generations to be healthier and to understand so many things that we're just now figuring out in our 30s, 40s, 50s, that had we known that, we would have made better choices back in the day.
Right. I mean, anytime that I see an ingredient is an endocrine disruptor, I am running the other way,
Yeah.
because we don't even fully understand, I don't think, what impact that's having on our little boys' testosterone, on our little girls'
No.
estrogen, on androgen, on like the hormones are in such a delicate balance. And the
Yes.
fact that we are exposed to so much assault on our hormone system, in our air, in our water, in the food that we're eating, especially with the pesticide applications, it's a big deal. So
It
anywhere
is.
that I can omit something, that might disrupt my kid's hormone system, I'm absolutely going to do it. And especially, again, sunscreen's like the easy one. You just have to buy a different brand. You don't have to learn to cook something new. You don't have to say,
Right.
children, eat these green things, like, right? Like, it's
Yeah.
just a slightly different tube or tub or whatever. So yes, our fertility, I know your audience knows how much it's declining and what a crisis we're in.
Yeah.
And so for everyone's fertility and for our children's fertility, we want to have them to have this habit of safe sun behavior, which is, yes, get a little bit of sun. Please get that vitamin D. Maybe don't
Yeah.
be in the sun right from, noon to 1, noon to 2. Like, try to seek shade a little bit, so you have
Yeah.
some balance, and then use zinc oxide sunscreen when you are in that sunshine.
Yeah, and I think this is like a good, so I'm sure, like, even some new listeners, or that, like, are just starting to understand and grasp what endocrine disruptors are, right? That can feel like a really long word, and people are like, what exactly is that? And I know, like, some of the work that you've done has been around the environmental working group, and my audience knows a lot about that. We talk about that, the Dirty Dozen, the Clean 15, but also, aside to the work that the environmental working group does, is they actually, like, screen and look at products for toxicity, and they kind of rank them on a scale,
Yep,
right?
1 through 10.
Okay. Yeah. So let's talk a little bit more about that, because I think this is important for people to know that this is a resource that they can go to and access
Mhm.
freely, and kind of start to learn about these things.
Right. And as with anything, EWG isn't perfect, but it is an awesome resource. So you can plug
Yeah.
in any personal product, sunscreen, shampoo, whatever, in there, and it will rank all the ingredients. And what we want to look for, it's kind of a green, yellow, red system. I think it's 0 to
Yeah.
2 is like perfectly
Yep.
safe, non-toxic. 3 to 6 or so is kind of that yellow light, like, there may be some issues, we don't fully understand it, or there are some definite issues, but they're more minor than the big dogs, right? And then they have the
Yeah.
red level, the 6 or 7 and up, and you'll definitely see those petrochemical sunscreen active ingredients are all ranked way up there. You said endocrine disruptors is a long word, it's hard to understand, but maybe estrogen mimickers, which is what most of the sunscreen
Yeah.
ingredients are. So if you think about, if you're adding something that mimics or acts like estrogen onto or into your body, that might not be what you need, right? It's
Yeah.
certainly not in
Yeah.
the dose you need. It is certainly not what your 3-year-old son needs, or your 16-year-old daughter. And so the fact that we're putting things on our skin that can mimic estrogen, it's just going to throw everything out of whack. And also, I have to say, many, maybe most of your conventional sunscreen brands are going to use parabens as well as a
Yes.
preservative. And your audience might be familiar with parabens, again, as an endocrine disruptor. So it's kind of a 1-2 punch. The great thing about most of your zinc oxide only brands is that they tend to be more natural. So, like, I've got a bunch here. I've tested 125 natural mineral
Yes.
sunscreens. So it's crazy. Like, our house is just drowning in sunscreen. Most
And you have a fantastic blog on this, because I was like, oh my gosh, I love this. So you guys will have access to that. We'll share that with you so you can dive in, because I'm sure you're probably thinking in your mind, so what brands are safe,
Yeah.
right?
When I started this, it was about 15 years ago. There were 40, period. EWG ranked 40 sunscreens as like the green light that was zinc oxide only, or zinc and titanium dioxide, which we can talk about titanium dioxide and why that's good and better, but not best.
Okay.
So I tested that first year, 28 of those 40. I thought I was crushing it. I'm like, that's more than half. Good for me. And the good news and the bad news for me, I can't keep up. I can't test all the new zinc oxide sunscreens that are coming out. But the good news is we have so much choice, because now there are hundreds, like maybe thousands, I don't know, but there are for sure hundreds of zinc oxide only brands. So that's where I say, like, it used to be a shoe-in that if you had zinc oxide only sunscreen, the other ingredients are also going to make you happy and make EWG happy. Yeah. Now, like Coppertone has a zinc oxide only sunscreen. So then you go, okay, Coppertone, you're a big brand. And so they, then you need to read the rest of the ingredients and make sure that there aren't parabens. We've been testing the Coppertone. It's like a pink bottle. It's Coppertone Baby, and it says mineral on it. And it's okay. It's interesting because it's really, really, really thin. So a lot of the zinc oxide only sunscreens tend to be thick because zinc is a mineral. It's a rock. So when it's crushed into a powder, it's a powder. And if you add a powder to a liquid, it thickens it. So I don't know how much you'll be able to see here, but like they're fairly thick. I teach people to put zinc oxide only sunscreens on with the dabba dabba method. So rather than put a glop in your hand and then try to smear, because that's you're gonna end up with like more of a white sheen. So you just dabba dabba and make these little dots, and then you rub in the dots, and it's going to be much it's more aesthetically pleasing if you do the dabba dabba method. So the Coppertone's super thin, which means it goes on like conventional sunscreen. But I actually just did a test on Sunday. So Mandy, this is how we've been living our last 15 years. When we put sunscreen on, it's side A-B. We put 2 on at all times, because if someone gets burned, then we know this one works better than this one.
Right.
So my kids, they actually get very excited if I say, oh guys, you can just wear one sunscreen today. They're like, yay! It's easier. Ridiculous, right? Like, we are a ridiculous family. So just Sunday, my husband was working in his parents' pool, like heat of the day, noon to 2. And so I put the 2 kinds on his back. And the Coppertone 50 SPF did not fare as well as the SPF 30. And I think, and he was sweating he was sweating. He was very sweaty. I think it's because it was so thin. It's so thin that you're probably getting like less zinc per square inch, even though it's rated 50 SPF and the other one was rated 30 SPF, it was super clear that it did better. It was really interesting.
I've always wondered about that, like, because it doesn't seem uniform. Like with 50, like, because I put that on my kids sometimes and like they'll burn, or like you'll do a 30 and they're fine. And so like this is just, it's fascinating to me from a biochemistry side of things.
Yeah.
And like having to test, like you get so much information.
I know. I'm so glad we got to the SPF numbers, because that is a pretty good example of what we call greenwashing, right? Or even just, it's almost propaganda, like especially when the brands started coming out with 100 SPF. Again, it gave people a false sense of security. They felt like they could be out all freaking day because they got 100 on. Well, guess what? 30 SPF protects you from about, I think it's in the 96 point something % of the rays. 50 is 97 point something. 100 is like 98. So the actual magnitude of differential is minuscule.
Minuscule.
You need 30, and that's it. If you see 50, you can go, fine. It doesn't mean you're that much more protected than 30. And actually the hundreds are now illegal. They can't say 100 because it was causing such problems.
Yeah. No, so that really does kind of go back to more is not always better, right? I mean, and that's the same thing even, and this is a side example, but like people that come to me on supplements, right? They don't know why they're taking them. They don't really know about the brands. They just don't, because there's so much information out there. And you start looking and you're like, okay, well, you're taking like 50 supplements a day. Like, this does not mean it's better. A lot of times it's like expensive urine, and you really don't know what's actually in those and if your body actually needs them,
Right. Yeah. So the SPF numbers, like, now like 15 to 30 can be a more significant difference. 30 to 50, almost nothing. Anything above 50 is marketing. They're trying to trick you.
Yeah, yeah. That's why you just have to be such an informed consumer.
Mhm.
Do your homework. It's frustrating. Like even like 2 months ago, I'm sure you saw this because so many of us eat oats, but like, they came out with like this chlormequat is being put on our oats, and it's been determined that it's unsafe, but they're still doing it,
Mm.
And so like, when you go to Costco, because we've got lots of kids and mouths to feed, you most people are like, well, let's go with a huge bag and the cheapest. But we know, like, if you're not doing organic, the risk there, and chlormequat has really significant health outcomes that we're finding out, which is somewhat similar to even the endocrine disruptors, and
Mm.
you know, so it's just so frustrating. So
Yeah, it really is. I remember reading, this is a couple years ago now, but Consumer Reports came out and said something to the effect of, yeah, mineral sunscreens are good. They're probably so much better for you and better for the environment, but it doesn't feel like anyone will really use them. So you should still use the other sunscreens. And I thought, like, is anyone processing this through logic at all? No.
right.
Do you want to talk about why some people would avoid zinc sunscreens? Like why they get a bad rap?
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
especially again,
absolutely.
yeah,
Let's
years ago they got such
talk
a
about
bad rap. People would be like, "No, I'm not switching my sunscreen because I will look like Casper the Friendly Ghost."
Yeah.
Right? Because zinc is a white powder, it sits on the surface of your skin, so there is sometimes like a white sheen. It's getting so much better. Again, when I was first testing, sometimes we really did like our kids would look like a statue because they were so like alabaster. But if you know how to apply it with the dabba dabba, that's really helpful. And there's also quite a few brands now coming out with tinted sunscreens. So I have just
Okay.
one of many here. Oh, it's brand new. Hang on. So this is a cool example. Raw Elements is a fantastic brand, and they do a lot of work to save the coral reefs and work in Hawaii and stuff like that. So I love
Okay.
Raw Elements. They're one of my top, probably out of this 125, I've got about 10 or 12 that I think are like
Yeah.
top notch. Like they're so
We
safe.
want all the dibs,
Yeah.
girl. All of
Like
it.
they're so safe you could eat them and they work and they look decent. So this
Right.
one is tinted. So it's got
Okay.
some, natural mineral, I think it is probably titanium dioxide, maybe not. Mineral tints in there. And so especially for like feet women, our faces, we don't want that like white glow. But even on guys, this typically looks okay.
Yeah.
I don't tend to do a lot of tint on the arms just because I don't want to get it all over my clothes. So we tend to do like tinted on the face. Um, and then the regular zinc oxide stuff down the arms. So that would be,
Okay.
again, people would say, oh, like there's no sprays. The sprays are so quick and easy. Zinc oxide can't aerosolize because it's a powder.
Oh
So
my
the
Lord. And like I'm thinking about people inhaling those every single time. And I was guilty of that. I put that on my kids back in the day because I thought it was the easiest
Mm,
thing. But then and then it kind of hit me. I was like, oh my, like, can you even imagine what's going on with the lungs? And
yeah, there
I
are
don't even.
some zinc oxide sprays, but they're totally different if you ever try them out. Like they spray on you, you can see it, and then you still have to rub it in. So I would recommend
Yeah.
staying away from those because if you do happen to inhale some zinc oxide, it is not safe. That is not good. So
No.
I would stay away from the sprays because they're not even that much more convenient because you still have to rub them in. The
Yeah.
conventional sprays, yeah, it kills me when people are spraying those at the beach and they're blowing over my family. I want to be like, stop it, like put down the sprays. Those are really
Right.
highly flammable. They have all sorts of
Yeah.
additional risks
They
built in.
do.
Plus, they have all the cancer causing, endocrine disrupting, coral reef killing risks. Like, hate those. I definitely hate those. Also, people
Yeah.
tend to use those on really wet bodies. You ever seen people do that? The
Yeah.
kid will hop out of the pool. The mom goes, honey,
Out
we
of the
need to
pool.
reapply. Kid hops out. It is dripping. And she goes,
Yes.
shh. And they immediately hop back in. And I just shake my head and I'm like, science, people. That you are
I
not doing that right.
Right, right. No, I so agree with you. Again, I've been guilty of some of this in the past, but then, the more you learn
Mhm.
about like the human body and like chemicals that we're just being doused in, and like as a practitioner in the space, like, I mean, I am seeing younger and younger women with hormone issues,
Mm.
with heavy menstrual bleeding, um, infertility, of course, it's just, and our men too, like our boys, like, Even a thing for me is like my kids, like they have phones, of course, which I don't love, and I want to turn off the 5G on them. But like when they're putting them in their pocket next to their like reproductive organs, I'm like, stop. Like, I actually want grandkids, like, stop microwaving your parts. I mean, it's just, that's a whole nother topic and rabbit hole we could go down.
It is. It
So.
is. So when it comes to that white cast, one of the ways in which brands have tried to combat that is nano sized particles or micronized
Yes,
particles.
I was going to ask you about that.
Yeah. So nanoparticles are less than 100 nanometers in size, which is 100 billionths of a meter. Like you can't even fathom how small that is. So it's basically, again, zinc is a rock. It's a mineral. It can be pulverized manually into a powder, and then beyond that, sort of super manually. What would that be? Like chemically, they're really we're having to apply some technological processes to get that to less than 100 nanometers. It could change the effectiveness because it may change the way it reacts with the sun differently. So there's like a small risk there. It's definitely going to go on nice and clear, which is a bonus, but it's also now small enough that it could seep into the skin. So it creates some questions of, is that still as safe as the zinc powder that stays on top? So I prefer micronized zinc oxide is small, but it's still greater than 100 nanometers. Shouldn't be small enough to get into the cell walls. So if you're really like, man, I hate the white cast. First of all, lots of brands have figured out how to do it, how to emulsify it just perfectly, and the white cast is not as much of an issue. Tinted is awesome, or look for micronized, but skip the nano because there's just too many risks and too many questions.
Okay, those are great tips. Because there's just so many different things to like sort through.
It's like you need a PhD to read the bottle.
Right.
Like, what is all that?
Here's the thing that a lot of people don't think about, because my master's degree was in research. So like I wrote research for 3 years. So evidence-based, placebo-controlled trials, a lot of this stuff's never been tested on humans for any period of time. And so, and you probably know the statistics on this, but going back, I think like it goes back to the 1950s, like the chemicals that we're using out there's so many now that they haven't been keeping tabs on what it's doing from a human health side of things or an environmental side.
Right. And the research is such a mess because you might see a research paper come out that says, oh, zinc oxide sunscreens get under the skin. It's been proven. But they didn't differentiate between nano and non-nano. So it's like that research is a piece of junk.
Well, and then you always have to like go back to who's funding this, right? Like that's a huge one. Like honestly, that's what I always do when I look at research anymore is, okay, well, who's funding this? Like what is their, what is their aim here? Because a lot of times they're just trying to verify that their products are the best,
Right.
So many like integrity things that you've got to really think about, which is why I like really say stay with people that are smaller businesses that like have a vested interest in our generations to come, that like really are thinking about our environment, the treatment of our animals, like so many things there to think about. Know your farmer. So
for sunscreens, if they are saying that it's reef safe, which by the way, 0 conventional petrochemical ingredients are reef safe. But if the brands are saying it's reef safe, like that's a pretty good indication that it's human safe as well. Like if you want one word to look for, reef safe would be great.
Reef safe.
And again, if you want one word to look for those active ingredients. If it's zinc oxide, you're pretty good to go. I wanted to address, because the bigger brands are now getting into the mineral sunscreen market. And it's partly because of buyers like us who are smart and savvy and asking for them. It's partly because of laws in Hawaii. Coppertone's like, darn, I can't sell sunscreen in Hawaii anymore unless I figure this out. But it's made it trickier to read the packaging because the big brands will throw the word mineral on the front. And then when you flip it over, they mix it. It'll be like 3% zinc oxide, 8% oxybenzone, 11%, like all the other ones. So it's like a token. But they're catching the somewhat smart, not so savvy shoppers who are like, ooh, mineral. It'll usually say mineral based. That's a
Yeah.
red flag. But you have to flip over the bottle. You have to read the back, unfortunately, because the
Yeah.
big brands, they just want to sell. They just want to make money.
Well, and unfortunately, some of the big brands have bought up the little guys, and the little guys that we used to trust. There's so many I could list right
Yep.
here. If you go into Target and you're like, well, that was bought out by Bayer,
Mhm.
or, one of these large companies that, they're all just about the profits, versus like the health benefits and outcomes.
Right.
It's like, frustrating.
Yeah, so that's why it's been fun being the Wikipedia of sunscreens and testing over 100, because I've gotten to actually speak to founders of companies, and like
Yeah.
hear their heart. Like, this is why we do what we do, because I'm a surfer and a chemist, right? Because
Yeah.
I scuba dive and I've seen the coral reefs. So it's so cool when founders have that story, and you know that they care about the environment, that they care about their own health and safety, and they're going to give you, the consumer, the same thing that they're putting on their families, which I love.
Absolutely, which is like so many of us in the holistic health space. Like, we have our own stories, like our personal stories, like family member stories on, why we've gotten into what we do. It's, so much easier to stay in the role of traditional whatever, because like, there's always jobs in that space, and it's harder to be an entrepreneur going out on your own, speaking your message. But yeah, it's there's a lot there, in knowing trusted companies,
Mhm.
and that's what I look for when I buy products for our family. You know, is this a good company? What is their vision and mission? Like, um, what's their thoughts on that? It's so important. So there's like my head is spinning with all of the things we discussed, right? I mean, there's so much there like to navigate. But you've given us a good starting place in like your own I think you called it your decision making tree for selecting sunscreens. So it's a little tricky, like as kids get older, and I know you're in the space now as well as I am. Like we've got some younger kids still, but how do your older kids? How do you work around that as far as not only sunscreen but just eating
Mhm.
healthy? I mean, it's just a challenge, right?
I do think it's one of the most important jobs as a parent, and one of the hardest parts of the job is, how do we pass on that ownership, right? How do we
Yeah,
help them care about their health, and thus about what they eat and about what they put on their skin? And part of it, luckily, is habit. We do have ingrained habits from our childhoods, probably, that we can look back and go, oh yeah, that's why I do this weird thing that I do, because I've done it since I was a
yes,
kid. So the more we can just make it a habit, right? And so, like, my kids are never going to go out and buy their own sunscreen because they're cheap,
right,
which is super.
yes,
So sunscreen is easy, but then, like, applying sunscreen, now that's a habit, right? And so
yeah,
just that idea
yeah,
of, I think I always call it a gradual release of responsibility. So whatever it is, whether it's household chores or cooking or what you eat, decisions about what you eat, or decisions about what you're buying. I've got a girl who's turning 16 next week. So we're in the makeup zone, and the
oh yeah,
face products and the shampoos and stuff. And it's been, I've let her make some semi-natural, kind of like, I know they're greenwashed, decisions,
yep.
because she's like, Mom, nothing that you gave me shampooed my hair and conditioned well enough. I don't like it. You know.
My 15, almost 16-year-old is the same way.
Mhm.
So she'll be 16 in September, and she's got very curly hair, redhead. And so that's been a challenge for me too, because she'll be on TikTok and she'll find the latest craze. And I'm just like, but like there's a piece of it you don't want to like over manage,
Mhm.
micromanage, because then they just push you away. So like sometimes when she'll come to me, I'll be like, so what do you think about that? Or, have you kind of done your due diligence? And like she's pushed back a lot over the years, but some things that recently I'm like, okay, she's heard some of what I've been talking to her about over the years. Is she was looking at like feminine care products
Mhm.
and was like, hey mom, did you hear about this organic brand, tampon brand, that they were saying that, but now they're going to court because they got slapped with, oh, there are actual chemicals in that. And so,
Mm.
but it really just training them to be informed consumers is a big job.
It is. Yeah, it's kind of nice when you go into a store with your kids and they do flip over boxes and they're
Yes.
checking. We're like, okay, that's a habit. Whether or not they always make the perfect decision that we would make for them, but
Yeah.
at least they know,
Yeah.
what are the worst ingredients to look for? Let's make sure we always avoid these. What are the best ingredients that we want to gravitate towards? And there's a whole bunch in the messy middle that maybe we take some and we leave some. And I always tell my kids, our bodies are amazing. We have a liver to filter out toxins, and our bodies really
Yeah.
can heal from and fight off a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
We just want to give them the least amount of crap possible. That would not be how I
Yes.
say it to the 9-year-old, right? But the least amount of poison possible, and we'll trust it. We'll trust our bodies to take care of some of the junk. And in
Yeah.
as many situations as possible, we try to keep the junk out. So there's that nice balance, I think, and just teaching the kids to like listen to their bodies and trust their bodies too is a big step. That's hard to do.
Yeah, it is. And I love, like, not making it fear-based, because we could live in a fear-based world just knowing how toxic it is and how it does impact us. But I love how you said, like, trusting our bodies, that, we do our due diligence and we do the best that we can given our situations and like the knowledge that we have and even our budget, right? Like, because there are a lot of products out there that are so pricey.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, and like even in the anti-aging arena, like the amount of creams and like products that you see, and honestly I kind of go towards less is better. You don't have to buy like a $250 cream from an anti-aging side of things. Why don't you think more about the quality of food that you're putting in your body, choosing as clean as possible? That actually makes a huge difference.
Mm-hmm. And we can put food on our skin. I think we've like
Yes.
traipsed about so many places with the sunscreen, but one area we didn't even talk about is that if a sunscreen includes an antioxidant like green
Yeah.
tea or even vitamin E, there's all sorts of lovely antioxidants. I've got this brand Kokua, which is made from mostly Hawaiian ingredients, which is kind of cool. And you start reading it and
Okay.
you're like, oh, that's food, like apricot fruit extract, So there's all
Yeah.
these fruits and these nut oils and green tea that are antioxidants. And so what better place to put it than on your skin when you're going into the sun, which is going to cause some oxidation no matter how well protected you are. It's not 100%. And so
Right.
you're fixing the problem as it's happening, which I think is pretty awesome. So for me, again, if I'm looking at those top 10 or 12 sunscreens that I love, they better
Yeah.
have an antioxidant in them. They better be almost safe enough to eat, or kind of, safe enough to eat. Not that you'd put it on your burger, but
Right.
people always say, Katie, you should make a reel where you like put sunscreen on your hamburger and then like, I'm like, maybe my 19-year-old boy will do that.
That's
Totally
right.
would.
That's right. No, I love that. It's so true. And I think too, like coaching people around label reading, is if you can't pronounce it, then it's probably not something that should be going on or in your body, right? I mean, and like, food sources, like I talk about, a lot of times, like, 5 or 6 ingredients in something that you can like pronounce and you know what it is.
Mhm.
But like, if there's stuff in there you don't even know what it is, then you probably shouldn't be eating it.
Right.
So, yeah.
Yeah, it's a great rule of thumb, especially for food. If you could
Yeah.
make it in your kitchen, then maybe pay the extra to have someone else make it in a factory. But if you could never put it together in your kitchen, is it food? Is it something we should be eating,
Right, right. So this has been awesome. I'm like, my mind is boggled. I'm gonna have to like look through your list now and find out, the best products. Cause like I kind of did like, you do research at different times, but like products are always shifting,
Right.
companies are always changing, and it's just so much to keep up on, which is why I do love the environmental working group, because they're constantly putting out stuff. And like you said, it's not a perfect place, but there's a lot of great information there. So if we were to tell the audience like the top 3 tips you would give them to kind of start like figuring some of this out and like kind of doing their own due diligence and research, what would you tell them?
I mean, the easiest one is zinc oxide only.
Yes.
When
Okay.
you're looking at those, um, understanding safe sun exposure is
Yeah.
then the second one. Like we were talking about, how do you get a little bit of unprotected sun exposure, testing your vitamin D, and then being smart about trying to cover up with, rash guards and swim shirts if you're out in the middle of the day and if you're out for like 8 hours. We want to be able to go to the
Yeah.
beach and have fun, but we also need to know, like, if we're smart about it, we're going to seek shade between maybe 11 and 2 and then go back
Yeah.
out, right? So there's just like so many savvy ways that you can do that. The third thing, I think it would be the antioxidants. Is look for
Yeah.
antioxidants in those ingredients and eat your antioxidants.
Yeah, I love it. And even like, I feel like even the fourth piece, which is kind of what you talked about with the endocrine disruptors, knowing what those are, like, understanding those so that like when you are actually looking at a label, then you can say, that's what that is. And, stay away from it, right? Pick a better product.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Do you want me to tell you a couple of brands that I love?
I would love that. I was waiting for this. Yes.
Well, I do love Kokua. And again, that's a mostly Hawaiian ingredients. They can't make it in Hawaii, but like it's based in Hawaii.
Okay.
Third Rock, you can't even see this one because we've worn the label off, but Third Rock is awesome. That's formulated by the surfer chemist. So he's like super smart, super geeky, and it's really unique. It's got, I don't know if I can get any out of here, but it's a very unique consistency where you have to actually kind of rub it together first instead of the dabba dabba method and then rub it on. That's my husband's favorite. He says, you can't see it. It goes on really clear and it's super effective. It's chelated zinc oxide. So it's just a different process because he's so geeky. He's such
right. He's a chemist.
So Leo is really good. They didn't used to be as good, but they've recently reformulated. So we're just testing the new version. And that one, it's like the consistency is almost like a mousse. So it's very unique. I don't know if they aerate it or what, but it goes on fairly clear as well. I talked about Raw Elements. That's another one founded by a surfer. Super, super good. And I love Raw Elements for families because they sell it in this tin. This is the tinted one, but they have a bigger tin that's just the regular white. So when you're putting it on your kids, it takes forever, right? Because you're picking up the tube, you're squeezing some out, you're dabba dabba, rub it in. And you pick up the tube, you squeeze it out. So there's an efficiency to the little tin because it's just swoop, swoop, dipping in. I don't know. I'm an efficiency geek.
And it does look tan. Does it look tan when you put it on, or is it really clear?
This is the tinted version.
That is,
and so it does look tan. I don't know like how much the video will come through.
Well, and you're kind of tan already.
But it looks okay. Like again, my husband kind of has the Irish skin, and as long as he doesn't put it on too thick. Like one time he did it without a mirror, and he walked out. I was like, honey, no.
No, not so much.
You need to thin that out a little bit. So it's not perfect. Cabana is another.
So that one you do put on like your arms, like it's not just your face, right? That one you will.
I could. Yeah. But because there are so many other options, I don't.
You kind of keep that one for the face?
I do. Yeah.
Okay.
Cabana is a really good one. Again, formulated by a chemist. That one, like he always says, it's safe to eat. If you're on a desert island and you had to eat it, you could. They have multiple tints. So they have like peach, nude. So you can choose your shade. So that's kind of nice. I think that might be the only brand I've seen that actually lets you choose your shade, which is cool.
That's cool.
And Stream to Sea is really good. They've recently done some research too on water safety because, well, the other thing, so the coral reefs, massive problem. But even on inland waterways, we're seeing fish transgenderize basically because of what we're putting in the waters. And so Stream to Sea recently did some research that their product, is incredibly safe and is not causing the endocrine disruptiveness in the fish. So it's probably good for us. They have it tinted, they have a sport version, and they have this one called Shimmer. It's got like a little glitter in it, which is just a hoot. Like for the little girls. I don't know. That's a pretty good list. Oh, Think Baby. I don't know where my Think Baby is. It's probably out in the wild. it's in the minivan or something. Think Baby's really good, and they tend to have larger bottles. So if you're thinking like big family, that might be one to look up too. And again, Raw Elements, the whole like ability to dip into the tin, I love.
Yeah, no. Okay, that is so awesome. Thank you for modeling some of those for us and just showing us what they look like. You guys, you'll be able to see this on that blog, right? That you
right. If you start, a good place to start would be kitchenstewardship.com/sunscreen because it's a really like condensed. These are my top recommendations. And then for the science geeks who want to dig into the whys and the wherefores, there's like a massive, I don't even know, I think it's a 70,000 word post at this point because it goes through everything, and then it has an individual review on every sunscreen we've ever touched. So you would never read all of those, but you might want to skip around like, oh, I saw such and such in my store. What did Katie think about it?
Yeah, I know, it's great. It's almost like a
Yeah,
database. Good grief.
it's huge. It's crazy. And I have some updating to do as well. Like I have notes, in my phone from testing over the last year where I need to go in and add some new ones.
Yeah, I know, it's a lot to keep up with. So that was great. You shared with us the kitchenstewardship.com.
.com/sunscreen.
Okay, /sunscreen. And then like you're out on social media. Do you want to share with everyone where you're at so they can find you?
Yeah, on Instagram, I'm at Katie Kimball Kids Cook. And Facebook, we have both Kitchen Stewardship and Kids Cook Real Food. Different.
Awesome. Well, it has been such an honor to have you on here. I know I followed you for so long, and so it was so good to meet you in person and just hear about all the cool things that you've been doing from a research side of things. But thank you for looking out for our skin health and our kiddos, and making sure everybody's trying to stay as healthy as they can.
Oh, well, thanks for having me on. I don't get to talk about sunscreen all the time, so I love to geek out when I get the chance. Usually it's kids cooking, picky eating, and stuff like that. So this was
Well, we'll
cool.
definitely have to have you back on to talk about other things too, because just food's a whole nother thing, right?
It is. It is.
So, okay, Katie, we'll see you here hopefully soon.
Thanks, Mandy.
You made it to the end of the episode. Let's keep this Gutsy fertility party going with some next steps to empower you along your wellness journey.